morning, everyone. Welcome to our SV Clean Energy Board meeting for August. Welcome back from summer break. Hope everyone everyone was able to have a little time off and get some rest and refresh for the rest of the year. I will call this meeting to order at 7 o'clock, and I guess I need to read my little spiel on COVID still. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with State of California Executive Order N2920 dated March 17, 2020. In consideration of the coronavirus COVID-19. All members of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors and staff will participate in this meeting by teleconference. Members of the public may observe this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting via the instructions on the agenda. Public comments can be that were sent in advance of the meeting to the board clerk, Andrea Pisano, will be read within the public comment period or the applicable agenda item. The public will also have an opportunity to provide comments during the meeting. The public may provide comments on any matter listed on the agenda. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes each. However, the board chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to each speaker based on the number of speakers, the length of the agenda, and the complexity of the subject matter. Speaking time will not be decreased to less than 1 minute. And with that, could we get the roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Abekoga.
Here.
Vice Chair Gibbons.
Here.
Willie.
Here.
Flagger.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Rennie.
Here.
Chua.
Here.
Elahi. Elahi. You could unmute, please.
Present.
Thank you. Yulo.
Here.
Walia.
Here.
Larson.
Here.
Ellenberg.
Here.
Thank you. And we are expecting alternate director Armendariz, but I do not see her present, but we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. We will now move on to public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. If anyone would like to speak on a non-agendized item, please raise your hand if you are in the attendee box. And if you are on the phone, I believe it's *9. And we'll start with Bruce Carney. Welcome, Bruce, please. I think you should be able to unmute yourself to speak. Oh, there we go.
Thank you very much. Welcome back from break. The topic I wanted to talk about today is urgency. The most recent IPCC report, at least as it was summarized by one major news outlet, is that we have 0 years left to make dramatic reductions in emissions of greenhouse gases. That's an odd phrasing, to have 0 years left. It basically means we've not used the last 10 or 20 or 30 years as wisely as we should have. And I wanted to ask the directors and the senior staff how to increase the urgency with which the agency addresses the need locally to meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets that are embodied in the strategic plan. One of my reasons for concern is that the effort to measure GHGs within the agency has been pushed back by half a year or more. And so the agency is not providing the city members information about how things have been going for the last few years. Emission estimates are always, they always lag the end of the reporting year. We certainly see that in Mountain View, which is committed to making GHG emission estimates every single year. It takes about 14 to 18 months after the end of the year before the numbers come out. And I don't know if SVCE can do better than that. But I'm not detecting from the staff members with whom I have spoken the level of urgency that I think the climate crisis demands. And so I request that the board members and Girish and his senior staff all do what they can to increase the agency staff's level of urgency, not just about developing new clean sources of energy supply, but of developing programs that really make a difference, bend the carbon curve. All of the right concepts are in place, but I'm afraid that the urgency that might have once existed 2 or 3 years ago when the agency was very young seems to be fading. And I hope that you can reverse that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on a non-agendized item? Please raise your hand or hit *9. I don't see any, so I will close public comment and bring it back to the board. I know we don't normally comment on non-agendized items. I think, however, with Bruce's comments, they will probably be addressed maybe in the CEO's report. I think there is a sense of urgency, but we are facing some major challenges, especially in the area of staffing. I think our staff is working really diligently and as hard as they can, but we're just really experiencing a period of time where we're not fully staffed. We have quite a few vacancies actually, and that's really our priority, is to get to full staffing. So that just leads to some natural delay on some things. So I wish I asked the public to be patient with us. I think especially with COVID, frankly, all agencies are facing these similar challenges. So hopefully we'll get through it soon, though. With that, I will move on now to the consent calendar. And are there any board members wishing to speak or pull a consent calendar item? So please raise your hand, and I don't see any hands, so I will open this up to the public for public comment on the consent calendar, and we'll start with Peter Myers. I believe you can unmute yourself. There you go. Welcome, Peter Myers.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Peter Myers. I'm speaking on behalf of ZEV 2030, which is agenda 1L, or item 1L on your agenda this evening. Wanted to thank staff and Chair Abe Koga for bringing this to the entire board, and for the chair having passed this already in Mountain View on her own city council. ZEV 2030 started several years ago, before the Biden administration, before Governor Newsom stepped up for zero emission vehicles as well. And so it's wonderful to have a third CCA voting on this evening. So far, 7 cities, including Oakland, Berkeley, Mountain View, and 2 CCAs, East Bay Community Energy and MCE, have both stepped up to the plate. If as a general announcement to all of the member cities, if this is a motion that you would and a resolution that you'd be interested in your own city and passing as your own city council, feel free to contact me, Peter at nextgeneration.org, or you can find us at zev2030.org, which is Zero Emission Vehicles 2030.org. Thank you very much for your consideration, and that's all the time I need. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to comment on the consent calendar? I don't see any hands, so I'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for any other discussion. And if someone
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. That was Director Yulo and Vice Chair Gibbons, excuse me.
Second.
Thank you. So there's a second by Vice Chair. Any other discussion? If not, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you. Abe Koga,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibbons,
Aye.
Willie,
Aye.
Fliger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Chua,
Aye.
Elahi,
Aye.
Yulo,
Aye.
Walia,
Aye.
Larson,
Aye.
Ellenberg.
Aye.
Thank you. And that motion carries with Director Armendariz absent.
Thank you. We will now go to the regular calendar. Item 2 is the CEO report from our CEO, Girish Balachandran. Hi, Girish.
Thank you, Chair Abekoga and members of the board. I have several items to update you on, and I will touch on Bruce Carney's comment on IPCC 6, both over here and when we come to the budget also. But I'd like to start with introducing two new members to our team and one who has a new role. So I'm going to start with Justin Zagunis. Justin Zagunis has been newly promoted to the Manager of Decarbonization Programs and Grid Innovation. And Justin has been with us for a couple of years, and he's done a pretty amazing job on a variety of program-related activities, including leading the Cal EVIP effort. So I'm going to ask Justin to introduce himself to the board.
Great, thanks for that reintroduction, Girish, and good evening, directors. What I'd like to add really is that really excited to be moving into this role here at SVCE. It's a really wonderful group of folks that have been assembled across the team. A lot of alignment with the kind of the mission of decarbonization that we all share. And I think being part of an organization where that's at the staff level, it's coming from the directors, it's obviously coming from member agency staff and from our community, really gives us the chance to do a lot. And so, excited to be in this role. I think we're in a really exciting moment with our programs because we've started to launch some. We have some, I think, learnings that we can take from the programs we've already been doing. And the question is, how can we take those learnings, apply them to our own efforts to go even further, share that with others in our region and with the state to kind of help them push the dialogue forward and really see some impactful change quickly. So looking forward to that and to continuing to work with you all and the folks here at SVCE to make that happen. I'll hand it back to you, Girish.
Thank you, Justin. The CEO report does have a short write-up on a number of new members to our team. I'm going to have two additional members introduce themselves. They'll be working closely with board members in one way or the other. Next person is Melody Vega, who will be serving as an interim executive assistant and assisting myself, the management team, and also preparing board reports for all of you. Melody, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Melody Vega. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in Mountain View. Yes, I know. And I worked as an admin support for the city of Palo Alto for 39 years, mostly in utilities. I'm very happy to meet all of you. And it's been nice to work with Girish again and a few others that I worked with in the past. And getting to know the staff at SVCE, has been amazing. They're hardworking, they're kind, and I really couldn't ask for a better group to work with. I especially want to thank Andrea Pisano for her patience and helping me to get up to speed and learn as much as I can before she leaves. I'm still learning, so I want to ask for your understanding and patience and probably forgiveness when I make a mistake. But I'm excited to work here and support all of you in the work that you do, and I just promise to do my best. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. I'd now like Dorothy, who is our interim board clerk, to introduce herself.
Well, could I just echo what Melody just said? It's really been a pleasure meeting the employees, and I'm looking forward to getting to know the board a little bit more. I don't know if any of you are Jeopardy fans, but if you do watch Jeopardy, you've been watching that they have substitute Alex Trebek's. And they always say, boy, they make it look so easy, but Alex made it look so easy, but it's really not that easy. So I've been learning a lot from Andrea, and all of the staff I've been working with have been really patient. My background, I've worked for 7 municipalities in my life, a little over 30 years of municipal government experience, working, spanning 3 states of Florida, Colorado, and California. My most recent tenure was with the city of Napa, where I was the city clerk. So I've been really fortunate to work in various departments and get to know municipal government very well. And I retired from the city of Napa a couple of years ago. And now I'm going to be working as your interim clerk for a time. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks for giving me the time to introduce myself.
Thank you, Dorothy, and wanted to welcome both you and Melody to our team. So thank you. Before we move on to the next topic in this CEO report, I just wanted to acknowledge and tell all the board members that Andrea Paisano, our superstar board clerk and executive assistant, is going to be taking some time off to have a baby, and she should be back with us by the end of the year, the beginning of next year. So I'm sure you all will be passing on congratulations and best wishes to her.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of updates on the strategic plan. Due to the previously mentioned staff shortage, I would like to postpone getting the write-up on the strategic plan updated for you. The executive committee and the board have already discussed the strategic focus areas and have given us direction on which our current budget is based. So as far as the board being involved in identifying strategic focus areas, I believe we've got to the meat of it. You've given us direction, the actual document, we will be updating for you most likely by October. I wanted to actually touch on, even before Bruce Carney mentioned this, is the IPCC report. It was a very depressing report. However, at SPCE, we are, I don't know if you can call us, yeah, we are a fortunate group of people who can actually try to do something about it. And this is something you've already done, and we can do more. So staffing is an issue, as Chair Abikoga said, but we're committed to bringing something back to you in the next couple of months, because the problem is so big. I don't just want to have activity without a real plan as to how we can have a major impact, because that's what's called for. It's not just urgency, which we totally get, but it's also where we want to place our focus. And we'll also talk about it in terms of resources we want to place to back up that vision and mission when we come to our budget, to give away the punchline, so to speak. But our budget does have a forecast where we will have a positive net margin for the coming year, but it's based on a forecast. At the end of this calendar year, the confidence in that forecast is going to be very much higher. So before that, we'll start to outline plans on what we can do to really accelerate our decarbonization efforts. And in the December, January timeframe, we'll come to you with some options and a recommendation as to how to deploy resources to get on a faster track. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Charles to provide you an update on legislative and regulatory affairs in the current landscape.
Thanks, Garish. Good evening, everybody. I have one slide, and I'm going to focus this update on reliability because it's top of mind in the governor's office. It's also top of mind with policymakers as well. So in terms of the most recent news, Newsom recently issued an emergency proclamation that ordered the energy agents energy agencies to ensure that energy supply meets demand in extreme weather events, as well as wildfires. And in response to that, the CPUC has basically amended an existing proceeding on near-term reliability needs to consider how we can meet those needs in 2022 and 2023. And also, this is also somewhat breaking news related to this. The CEC issued an analysis yesterday that showed a 5,000 megawatt shortfall in terms of reliability for 2022. So again, in terms of urgency, it also adds to the need in terms of procurement as well. So we will be working with CalCCA and through CalCCA on this new amended proceeding to see what comes of that. In addition to that, I've discussed the new procurement mandates in previous meetings, and the most recent one was the 11,500 megawatt order from the CPUC of new capacity in the midterm. So the midterm is 2023 through 2026. Of that, SCCE is responsible for 237 megawatts. So this is an unprecedented mandate. There are a lot of rules in terms of the type of energy that can be procured. It's clean energy. And so again, the rules continue to shift and change when it comes to resource planning as well. And finally, there are new rules related to reliability when it comes to resource adequacy. So resource adequacy is focused on reliability. There have been some changes in terms of existing rules, but in the coming months, the CPC is going to be working out details of completely restructuring the resource adequacy program through an extensive stakeholder process that includes a number of workshops over the next 6 months. So that is also at play as well. So the key takeaway with all of this is that our procurement obligations, our reliability rules are continuing to shift and change.
Sorry, Alicia.
And yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a logistics issue.
Yes.
Board members, we are working on the slide. The display of
I
the
was wondering
slide
about this.
is a little off. So we're troubleshooting that. So Melissa, you'll have to put words to that picture even more.
Okay, so the picture shows basically Newsom's procurement mandate. It shows the new procurement mandate with 11.5 gigawatts, and it also shows resource adequacy. It's not, as you can see, I can see it now, it doesn't have a lot of words to it. But the bottom line with all of this is that our procurement obligations continue to evolve and change. And in real time, we're getting new procurement obligations. We are also expecting new rules when it comes to reliability and potentially other procurement obligations when it comes to 2022, 2023. Monica's team, my team, working with Monica's team, are trying to figure out what the impact on SCCE. Monica's team is looking at the gaps when it comes to both near and midterm procurement obligations. So I wanted to flag this for you. We will continue to have this conversation as things progress, but wanted to let you know where we are right now. And with that, I'll stop. I thought I saw a hand. I don't know if it was related to the technical difficulties.
I believe it was. We open for any questions for Melissa. Not seeing any. Chair Abekoga, that's the end of the CEO report. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for overall on the overall report by board members? Not, go to public comment. Any members of the public wishing to comment on the CEO's report, please raise your hand. We don't see any, so close public comment, bring it back to the board. I just want to, oh, yes, Vice Chair.
All right, Margaret, could you increase your volume? I can just barely hear you.
Yes, I'll try to do that.
Thank you.
Did you have other comments or was that, is that it? I guess that was it. I just want to congratulate Justin and welcome Dorothy and Melody. And I was going to wish Andrea at the end all our best as she goes on maternity. We'll look forward to seeing some great photos later on in the year. Yes, welcome aboard. Congratulations. Lots of congratulations. So thank you. With that, we will now move to item 3, which is the adoption of a resolution authorizing the CEO to execute the power supply contract with California Community Choice Financing Authority. And our staff speaker is our CFO and Director of Administrative Services, Amrit Singh. Welcome, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Margaret. Good evening, directors. Pleased to bring the transaction for approval. But as Andrea brings up the slide, let me make a couple of introductions. Joining me for this presentation is Mike Berwanger. You'll remember Mike, he was with us. He's been in several of the finance committee and executive committee meetings, and he was also at the April board meeting when the board voted to join CCCFA. Mike's from PFM, Public Financial Management. He's a financial advisor on the transaction. Also joining me for this presentation is Doug Bird. Doug is from Chapman and Cutler, and he's our prepay and disclosure counsel. So Chuck's been instrumental in drafting and negotiating, helping us negotiate all the key provisions and drafting all the key agreements for the prepay transactions. So they're also here and can take any questions you may have for them. Okay, so let's begin with the prepay. Let's, Andrea, move to the next slide. So for discussion today, what I thought we'd do is we go through a very brief review of the prepay transaction. If you recall, when the board approved that we joined CCCFA back in April, we went through a very detailed presentation step by step as to how the prepay transaction works. If anyone's interested in that, I have materials in the appendix and I can always refer to them and go through as much detail as needed. Then I thought we'll talk about benefits and risk of prepay, the size of the deal and the type of discounts we're targeting, and summary of transaction documents. As you probably noticed from your board package, it's a very thick package this time, as there are a lot of related agreements that need to be executed, and we'll go through and summarize what those agreements entail. And then we'll talk about what the next step happens after the board approval, and then we'll ask for your approval. Okay, so with that, we'll begin with the review on the next slide. So again, our goal here is to reduce the cost of power purchases by leveraging our ability to access tax-exempt debt. So this, if you remember, what we're doing is we're doing a legal arbitrage between taxable and tax-exempt interest rates, corporate taxable debt and municipal tax-exempt debt rates, and translated that into a savings that will into our power purchases for power that we run through the prepay transaction. So that's our goal, is to reduce the cost. And I will just add that this is a competitive advantage for us CCAs, because this is not something that investor-owned utilities can do, because they cannot access municipal debt. So any advantage on a commodity transaction is very good to have. As you know, the commodity markets are very volatile and their margins are very thin. So it's good to have a competitive advantage in this area. If you recall, the effort began at SBCE about 2 years ago in June of 2019. So we spent quite a bit of time. And within that time, we've made several presentations to the board, the Finance and Administration Committee, and the executive committees. As I mentioned, as recently as April of this year, you authorized that we join CCCFA, which is the entity, the separate legal entity, JPA, that we set up that will issue the tax-exempt bonds. Last week, the Finance and Administration Committee met and also reviewed the prepay transaction, and the board and the committee unanimously recommends the board approve the prepay transaction. Again, we in In completing our transactions, our negotiations, we've worked with a seasoned team of professionals to help guide, negotiate, and structure the transactions. There are the fees for these, just as a reminder, the fees, the transaction and the attorney's fees will be split with East Bay, and they will be paid from the bond proceeds. So the savings we'll be talking about will be net of these fees, and these fees are in the order of magnitude of about $1.4 million. And I have a summary slide in the appendix if you want to go into detail. And these are transaction fees. These are not underwriting fees for the bond issuance itself. That's a separate fee that's proportional to the bond size, and we expect that to be about $7 million. And again, our savings that I will be quoting later on will be net of these fees. The term of the transaction will be a 30-year, but the bonds will reprice every 5 to 10 years. Will reprice somewhere between 5 to 10 years. And we will know the exact tenor of the initial term once we go to market. What we're looking for is basically the tenor that gives the most optimal spread between the taxable and tax-exempt debt rates. The 30-year differential isn't there to give us the savings we need, but shorter tenor is. And the idea is that once let's say we do a deal for 10 years, the initial term of the bonds is set for 10 years. After 10 years, the bonds will reprice, and then we will agree on a new set of discounts. And I'll cover this in the upcoming slides as well. So let's go to the next slide, please. So let's quickly review the benefits and risk of the prepay program. So the savings that we're targeting, we expect it to be around 6 to 12% per year on quantities that are delivered through the prepay structure. Now, previously, when we made presentations on prepay, we've said, our target was 8 to 12%. You'll notice that I've lowered the lower end of the target to 6%. And the reason for that is the recent power prices are high. So the contract that we intend to novate or assign into the prepay structure, if we were to get the minimum target discount that we're seeking approval for if we were to get $3, the discount would be about 6.5%. But the market could, about a week ago, was at a level where it could have supported about a $4 per megawatt hour discount. So if we get 4 or slightly more, we will be in the 8 to 12% range. But again, the dollar numbers, if you notice, I'm still are at the same range as quoted before, about 1.3 million to 1.7. 1.7 ties closer to a $4 discount. There's favorable risk terms for us. The debt is non-recourse to us. In other words, they are not our obligations. They're actually not CCCFA's obligations. These bonds are basically backed by Morgan Stanley. So the risk, what if something were to go wrong? The risk is we would go back to square one. In other words, the contracts that we assign into the prepay structure would revert back to us. Our loss would be the investment time that we put into it, and of course, any future savings will be foregone. What we've realized, obviously, we get to keep that. But speaking of the risk, the party that takes on the most risk here are the bondholders. They are the party putting up the money for the prepayment, right? So when they look at the transactions, they want to make sure the CCCFA's cash flows will be sufficient to to basically service the debt, make the timely principal and interest payments. And they know that if anything goes wrong, they're basically on the hook with Morgan Stanley. It's basically Morgan Stanley's credit rating risk that they're taking on. So let's take a hypothetical scenario. Let's say Morgan Stanley, for something catastrophic happens, and Morgan Stanley, for example, can no longer be in big business and goes for bankruptcy, similar to what happened to Lehman Brothers. In that case, the contract would revert back to us. We will conduct business as was the case prior to the prepayment transaction. The bondholders are the ones who are basically out of the money. and they will likely seek a claim in Morgan Stanley's bankruptcy proceeding. So there's not a claim. We are not on hook for those payments, other than whatever payment remains in the CCCFA's trust account. And this concept is actually been tested because there was prepayment transaction when Lehman went bankrupt, and I think Mike can speak more to this. And during that time, the mechanisms for prepay structure basically worked as it was intended. If there were any questions, Mike can can elaborate on this point as well. Lisa, do you have a question on this?
I do. Thanks. I'm Rich. On the risk, I'm trying to reconcile the risk where it says back to square one and risk number 2 where it says assigned contracts revert to SVCE. Because when I hear back to square one, it sounds like we're starting over, but we're not. We would just be picking up where the Morgan Stanley example you gave, which I thought was a good example, we would just continue wherever that responsibility is for the CCFA. Or would we be actually going back to square one?
What I mean is the contracts will go back to us. We will conduct business as we were conducting today. So we will forego any future savings because if Morgan Stanley goes bankrupt, the prepay transaction terminates. And the contract will revert back to us. So our loss is the time we put into the deal. The savings we realize up to that point, we get to keep, obviously. But any future savings we forego, and we will obviously pursue other prepaid transactions to make up for that.
But we wouldn't have to re-engage in any contract negotiations or anything like that. The only thing that would really happen is just a reassignment to SVCE as the party.
Yes, those mechanisms are already baked into the contracts. If this happens, this clause triggers a termination, contract goes back to us, all those contract rights revert back to us, and each party's roles and responsibilities are all well defined in these agreements. Good question, yeah. Okay, with that, we'll move to the next slide, please. So the deal size and the discount. What we're asking board's approval is that we issue aggregate principal amount of bonds not to exceed 1.25 billion. I guess this is also includes EBCE. EBC being a larger CCA, their portion will be slightly higher than us. We expect our portion will be somewhere around 500 to 600 million if we were to issue a principal amount of bonds of about 1.25 billion. And this will cover about 10% of our load. About 50 megawatts would go into the prepay structure, which equates to about 10% of our load. And you may ask, well, why limit to 10%? It's such a good deal. Why not do more prepays? This is our first prepay deal, and we do anticipate doing more prepay deals to bring more savings to our portfolio. We could easily cover at least up to 50%, maybe more. But those we will have further discussions with the board to pursue those opportunities. Again, the transaction will be split with EBCE, and as I said, the authority we're seeking is the contingent that we at least achieve a $3 per megawatt hour savings. And as I said, that's a minimum threshold we're establishing for the initial period. But we may, hopefully the market conditions can support something higher than that. And as I said, about a week and a half ago, it was somewhere around $4 range. And the last point there, I think I covered in the previous slide. Only point I will bring up is when the initial period of the bond expires. Let's say the initial period is 10 years. We will then look at the market. Then the discount will then be determined based on what the prevailing market is, the spread between taxable and tax exempt debt rate at that time, and how we will establish the discount are all laid out in the repricing agreement. And in the repricing agreement, we said at that time, we want to have a right to at least get $2 per megawatt hour discount. And if if the $2 is not met, we want to have the right not to move forward with the repricing for the reset period. It's our right. We want to accept something lower, we can, but we're putting this in the repricing agreement. We've also put agreements in there that we have the right to shop the prepay supplier during each reset period if we think we can get a better deal than what Morgan Stanley is putting forward. We can shop for other suppliers, and we can do this about 6 to 7 months before the reset period. These provisions were, I will say, were very aggressively negotiated with Morgan Stanley to the point where they were willing to work out, and as Mike's indicated to me, the terms that we've negotiated in this agreement are better than some of the standard terms in the prepay, in the normal prepaid transactions. Okay, that move to the next slide, please, Andrea. So now I want to summarize some of the key agreements that we need to execute. So first, I've listed the 5 main agreements we need to execute that will be signed by SBCE. So the main one is the power supply contract. So this is between us and CCCFA. And this basically provides for the terms that CCCFA, if you deliver energy, we will pay you. Basically what we will pay is our contract price, the contract price we would have paid the energy supplier minus a discount. And if they don't provide the energy for whatever reason, we will not pay. Then there's a letter agreement regarding understanding between the parties of PPA assignments, future PPA assignments. So it's between us, CCCFA, and Morgan Stanley. It basically details terms that we will take commercially good, reasonable efforts to assign a PPA at each reset period, and as the term of the current assigned PPA ends, all those terms are detailed in this agreement. Then we have the limited assignment agreement. So this is the agreement that we execute along with Morgan Stanley with our third-party supplier that we are partially assigning into the prepaid transaction. It lays out the terms of assigning the contracts to Morgan Stanley, and the good thing is now that we have in a lot of our PPAs, we have asked rights that we have the right to assign our PPAs, but in the future PPAs that we will execute with counterparties, we will basically include the standard assignment agreement as a condition for doing deals with us, and that will make future assignments of energy supply agreements much easier for us. We already agreed on upfront. Then there's the project administration agreement. This is between SVCE, EBCE, and CCFA. So this handles some of the administrative items and the terms around that. For example, it says that we as CCAs will continue to be scheduling coordinator. It lays out terms for things like annual refund that we may be entitled to from CCCFA. And the last agreement here is the energy supply PPA custodial agreement. So this is an agreement that we will execute with Morgan Stanley and the custodian bank, which in our case will be Bank of New York. And this basically lays out the terms for handling cash flows for making the required payments to the energy supplier, who makes what payments to the energy supplier. Some payments come from Morgan Stanley, some payments may come from us. In some cases, we may get a refund, but it will all amount to us paying our payment again, and under all scenarios will be the fixed price less the discount. Next slide, please, Andrea. So these are the main agreements that CCCFA will have to execute. The first one being the major agreement is the prepaid agreement. So this lays out the terms of the prepayment under which CCCFA will give the bond proceeds to Morgan Stanley, and it lays out all the terms and conditions under which Morgan Stanley then is obligated to provide energy, CCFA, same energy that then CCFA will sell to us. That again comes from the contract we assigned to Morgan Stanley. This contract largely mirrors our power supply agreement that we have with CCFA. The second agreement here is the trust indenture. And this is between CCFA and the trustee, which will be also Bank of New York. And it sets the terms for the bond issuance and the rights of the bondholders, and basically secures the cash that goes into CCFA to ensure that those proceeds are secured on behalf of the bondholders, so that the CCFA can make timely principal and interest payments to the bondholders. The repricing agreement, which I talked about, this is between CCCFA and Morgan Stanley, and it sets the terms for the repricing of the bonds at each of the future repricing periods, and it lays out the terms of the calculation of future discount that will be offered to us. There's also commodity swap agreement. I don't want to go into too much detail, and this was not included in the board package. And basically, the essence of this is that if there's any indexed floating payments, where, for example, EBC's deal at the beginning is going to be based on an index payment, and ours will convert to index payment after the end of the 3-year of the assigned energy contract we're assigning in. It basically swaps the index payment that CCFA gets and flows that to the counterparty, the swap counterparty, and in return, and swap counterparty will flow that to Morgan Stanley, and Morgan Stanley will flow the fixed payment to CCC, to the swap counterparty, and the swap counterparty to CCCFA. So basically what happens to CCCFA, it's basically hedges their risk against market exposure. So they will always end up with a fixed price, certain cash flow with 100% certainty of what those dollars are, not subject to any kind of a market risk. Next slide, please. The other document, this is not a document we signed, but used to market the bond, is the preliminary offering statement. It provides a lot of information on the prepaid transaction, including the key terms. Of all the agreements we submitted to you, it's a lot. If you were to read one, I would encourage you to read the POS. It has good summary of the key terms of the energy prepayment transaction. And the appendix also includes background information on SVCE that we used to that will be provided to the investors. Next slide. I think that pretty much concludes some major points. So yeah, next steps. So once we receive your approval, we will then have to go to the CCCFA board. Seek CCCFA board's approval at its August 26th meeting. And EBCE, our co-participant, received for the same set of transactions that we're bringing to you, they received their board approval in July. CCCFA, again, is another legal entity, and we are one of the members, and Grish is the vice chair of the board. And MCE last month at the last CCCFA meeting brought forward their prepaid transaction, which got approved. And they're also going to the market to issue their bonds as well. Once we achieve these agreements, the target for bond issuance is likely to be in September. We think we can execute in September, but again, the actual timing will depend on market conditions. We think the market is there, but if it's not there, we will not execute it, at least until we can get our minimum discount, but we're hoping we can do better than minimum. Next slide, please. I think, with that concludes my presentation. And with that, we on slide 10, we seek your approval of for the CEO to execute all the related agreements. And again, the issuance is contingent that the bonds are not our SBCE's obligation, that we achieve at least a $3 minimum discount, and the principal issuance of the bonds not exceed 1.25 billion. With that, I can take any other questions. And again, I have more information in the appendix, and we can go in more detail if need be.
Thank you. Thank you, Amrit. We do have some hands, so we'll go to Director Tyson.
Oh, thank you, Amrit, for that presentation. And you are indeed correct. There were quite a few pages of documents there to look at. And I appreciate Karisha spending time with me earlier today to help answer all my questions. And then I just came up with a new one. And that is, to what extent is the success of this venture dependent on East Bay Clean Energy's financial health? And secondly, and kind of related to that, why did we choose to partner with them on this?
So I will say on the credit question, good question. For a large extent, it doesn't matter. Because as I said, when the people who are facing the most risk are the bondholders. And they know that the entity that can put them at risk is Morgan Stanley. So they care about Morgan Stanley's credit rating. Now, yes, they care about our well-being. That's why we're providing our information in East-based information. It does impact somewhat, but it's not a major driver because the credit rating of Morgan Stanley is they're the ones holding the money. If anything happens, they are the ones who have to redeem the bonds and come up with the cash. So they care about the credit, and we chose Morgan Stanley because it's a highly rated entity. Why we chose to go with East Bay, it's before my time, so I should let.
I can interject, Amrit. It's Doug. So the part of the driver of these transactions is to increase the size to a certain extent, right? So adding East Bay allows a bond size, as Amrit, described earlier. A big driver of this is, the differential in interest rates, right? Is a primary driver of it, and you can benefit from your tax exemption. So the more, volume you can add to the transaction, and not to load that onto Silicon Valley, but to split that with East Bay kind of made some sense, right? It's presented certain complications because we've had to have, the ideas about, how we collectively do things and how we individually do things. But I think we've well worked that out. But that's primarily the reason and in East Bay can fall away and the transaction will continue with Silicon Valley and vice versa. So that won't, either CCA's failure in the transaction won't influence the transaction for the other CCA.
Great, thank you for that answer.
Sure.
Any other questions from board members?
I think Javed has a question.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with the virtual hand. For some reason, I don't have that on my screen, so I have to shake my regular hand. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It's very, very complicated, obviously. I was obviously have been interested in the cost of this whole transaction to make sure it justifies the fees, the arbitrage that you're going to get with, and I understand there's an initial cost, and I don't know if there's an annual cost or not. So I know you have a chart on that. If you can go through that one. Helpful.
Yeah, Andre, there's a slide on the fees. You can bring that up. So the fees that Andrea will show on the slide, those will be paid out of the bond proceeds. So when we say we get $4 discount or $3 discount, that's net of those fees. And most of the ongoing costs, like the commodity swap fee, the Morgan Stanley service fee, Andre, we have the same issue now with the slides. those are actually baked into the cash flows. So the savings are net of those. What other direct ongoing costs we may face or we will face will be what we talked about before, is the general and administrative cost of CCCFA. Remember from April, we said the cost split between 4 founding members, our share would be about $25,000 a year. And even that fee could be offset by the annual refunds we could earn. What happens is that the funds that go into CCCFA, there's a float period before they have to make payments for interest and principal. And during that float period, we can earn a return on those funds. And that would be any of those savings would come back to us as annual refunds. And that can more than offset the $25,000 expected fee. So ongoing costs are very minimal. We may have some Moody's ratings fee ongoing in the magnitude of somewhere around 15,000 or less. Again, that would be split with EBCE. On the slide here, we show the transaction fees that will be worked into the cash flow economics. You can see the transaction fees. All of these fees, with the exception of Moody's fee, are contingent on the transaction going through. Transaction doesn't go through, we will not incur these fees. Moody's, once we engage with them, then we are obligated to pay that fee. And we have negotiated with Morgan Stanley that they can pick up half of that if the transaction falls apart because of market reasons. And then we will split the remaining with the EBCE. So you can see the transaction fees are 1.4. The underwriter's fee for issuing the bonds is about 7 million. And again, when I quote the numbers of $3 and $4, those are after these fees have been accounted for, and these fees will be financed from the bond proceeds.
Amrit, I think it's just also worth mentioning, all of these parties were brought to the table through very competitive solicitations. You did RFPs for everybody on this page, kept everybody honest on their fees, and made everybody be, sharpen their pencil, so to speak.
That sounds good. So just to understand it, you've got 1.4 million and a $7 million fee, which will not be paid unless the transaction goes through. And that's just the starting out initial fee. It's not an ongoing annual fee. And to be able to justify the $7 million, you need to do a bond issuance of how much? What's the, so that we have that saving of $3 or $2 discount. What kind of revenue do we need to get?
This is on the bond proceeds of principal amount of 1.25 billion, and the underwriter's fee is directly proportional to the bond size. If the bond sizing is less than that, that fee will proportionally drop.
Okay. And we're expecting to do that kind of transaction initially, or what's our initial load that we're putting in this transaction?
It's 50 megawatts, about 10% of our load.
Okay. Sounds good. And I understand you said we can stop anytime. Well, not anytime. I guess after the 5, you'll either do a 5-year or a 10-year transaction, even though you said it's a 30-year bond, but the transaction is only for 5 years. So
the transaction is, sorry, Javed, the transaction is for 30 years. The bonds will reprice that's depending on what period we pick for the initial period, somewhere between 5 to 10 years.
So there'll be a formula. They'll say in 5 years, you're going to reprice it based on certain interest rates or certain other arbitrages.
Yeah. Same parameters we're pricing on today.
Okay.
And then if we don't get to a discount, the minimum discount that's been agreed based on those same, good faith pricing parameters, we don't continue.
All right.
You don't have to continue. You can choose to, but don't have to.
Yeah, so the formula is baked in right now. You just have to look at it at that time. And if you don't want to continue, we can choose not to.
Correct.
Correct.
All right, great. Thank you.
Director Chua? Could you unmute yourself, Director Chua?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question. And this is, I don't foresee this happening, but if it does, what is your backup plan if the transaction fails?
If the transaction fails, again, we are not taking much of a risk, right?
Right, I understand that. But
So we will go back to business as usual. The contract will come back to us that we assign into the prepay, and nothing prevents us from pursuing other prepay transactions.
okay, I mean, it could be getting a new Morgan Stanley or getting a new
Right.
Bank of America.
Correct.
Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
someone other than Morgan Stanley. Correct.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Director Willie.
Hi, yeah, maybe Amrit could put that slide back up. I mean, I always understand things better when I see the numbers. And so I just want to clarify, the total bonds are going to be 1.25 billion, but I think I'm understanding that Silicon Valley Clean Energy's portion of that is 500 to 600 million. And so these fees here, I'm thinking, reflect the 1.25 billion.
Correct.
If our portion is 500 to 600 million, then realistically, we're talking about half of the 1.4 million and half of the 7 million.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Just, then we don't have to digest quite as large of an item there if our portion is only half of that. And so, that's still a big number, but at least maybe I won't be too blown away by it. But thank you for clarifying that. And, if I'm correct, it sure sounds better if it's half of what we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions from directors? If not, I will open this up for public comment. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, please raise your hand if you're in the attendee box or press *9 on the phone. And I don't see any hands, so I'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for further discussion and a motion. Yes, Director Rennie.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of the Finance and Admin Committee, I should report that we talked this over extensively doing our due diligence as we've been doing tonight some. We also did, I'd say with help from Director Mekicek, much more due diligence. We had the players in the room, Mike Maher and Michael Berwanger, there, and we asked many questions and feel comfortable on our recommendation that the board go ahead and approve this. And so I guess it's appropriate as chair of the Finance Committee that I go ahead and make the motion that we adopt resolution 2021-20 authorizing the CEO to execute the power supply contract with the California Community Choice Financing Authority and the related agreements in there, which include the letter agreement regarding PPA assignments, the form of limited assignment agreement, the project administration agreement, and the energy supply PPA custodial agreement.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So we have a motion from Director Rennie, Chair of the Finance Committee, and second by Director Elahi. Any other discussion? Oh, yes, we have a hand from Director Willie. Up.
Oh boy, when we talk money, I always kind of sit up straight. So the question I would have is that, again, going back to the very beginning, we were saying that this is going to be about 10% of our total power purchases, and that this might then be copied and used again and again. And so with that being said, I would toss out for discussion, would it be good to have some check-ins, kind of say it up front that if this process is going to take, say, 6 months, and what is that time frame? Is it 6 months or something? That all the items of the agreement are signed, it's in place, and such, that then now that that agreement is in place, 6 months later, we simply come back, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little later, and double check, did all of our assumptions play out as we thought they were tonight, or were some of the costs higher, some of the things lower, and have that so that we kind of know how good we did after the fact. And before we then go and do this a second time or a third time, we just make sure that we were really happy with how everything played out. And so I just kind of toss that out, double check, as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Willie. Did you is that can we get staff response on that?
The only thing I would say is, we need the approval tonight,
right,
to be able to execute the transaction, which will be very, market sensitive, as Amrit indicated. We think it'll be September, and then, hopefully, and then there will be a short period of time. But I think the energy, Amrit, under this transaction will actually start flowing in December of 2022. Am I right?
January.
So, I'm sorry, January of 2022. So it'll be a little after this year before the energy actually starts to flow, and then the savings begin to be realized. But when we price the transaction, you'll know what the discount actually was, and it'll be above the minimum that we've established tonight. And then after the transaction starts to, and the energy starts to flow through the transaction, there will be, and there, it's like their cash flows from the trustee, et cetera, that will show, how the transaction is performing. So at any time, could come back to the board and, sort of prove up that we've established the discount and the transaction's working as we expected. And then, lessons learned, and hopefully costs saved, we can do another one.
Right.
Thank you. CEO, did you have some further comments?
Yeah, if it's okay with the board, I'll just take that as an action item to come back with a review once we have all the data in. And I'll bring it to the Finance Committee and then maybe put it on consent for the entire board.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So with that, any other discussion? If not, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. Chair Bekoga?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibbons?
Aye.
Willie?
Aye.
Armendariz?
Yes.
Fliger?
Yes.
Tyson?
Yes.
Rennie?
Aye.
Chua?
Aye.
Elahi?
Aye.
Yulo?
Aye.
Walia?
Aye.
Larson?
Aye.
Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously with all present.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. We will move on to item 4, which is to provide feedback on the fiscal year 2021-22 proposed operating budget and resolution authorizing the CEO to act as Chief Personnel Officer, as well as an update on budget and reserve policies. And this is a discussion item, and I will ask again Amrit to do the presentation.
Thank you again. Okay, so it's that time of the year that we bring forward budget for the next fiscal year for the board's review. Go to the next slide, Andrea. So what I plan to do is go through, basically review where we are in the budget approval process and share some good news about how our revenues will trend for next year based on where PG&E's generation rates are and the PCIA is. Then I'll share with you the actual budget numbers and we'll talk about the drivers, cost drivers. You'll see that power supply costs are coming in higher. Our operating expenses are coming in higher. We'll go into the reasons why. We're asking for new staff positions to basically beef up the organization, and we'll go through that. And then we're in item 7 here. We've talked to the board before. This is to give CEO the flexibility to act as a personnel officer. And then we'll look at our reserves outlook and the needed revisions that we need to make to the reserves and budget policies to account for the way our business operates. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So where we are in the budget approval process, in June, we did a preview of our budget and we went through in detail on the components of our budget at that time. Then last week, we presented the budget that we're bringing to the board today to the Finance and Admin Committee. And the Finance and Admin Committee voted unanimously that the board consider the proposal. So after your review today, we will incorporate any changes and feedback we receive from you, and then we will bring the budget at the September 8th meeting for adoption. And then following that, as we do every year, we will do a mid-year review and adjustment of the budget around the March timeframe. Okay, with that, we'll go to the next slide. So the good news is that this year, this coming fiscal year, we're looking at substantially improved margins, and they're largely driven by, one, PG&E's generation rate is expected to increase by 9.5%, and the PCIA is expected to drop by 47%. As I'm showing on the chart on the right here, you can see when we charge our rate relative to PG&E. And right now we're at a 1% discount. So when that bar, the PG&E rate goes higher, this blue box, the SPC gen rate, has room to go up higher. And when the PCIA shrinks, the blue box can get even bigger. So that's basically translates to higher margin for us, which will translate to higher revenues for us. So we're projecting, and there's quite a bit of consensus around several consulting agencies on these PCIA and PG&E gen numbers to be around 2.4, 2.5 cents on PCIA and generation rate of around 12 cents. And even PG&E's 2022 error forecast application, which they made in June of this year, was in line with these numbers. So again, if these numbers prevail, we're looking at our margin improving by 50% in calendar year 2022. We still have, in the upcoming fiscal year, we'll still have 3 years under the current margin rates, but starting in January, we get to realize this improved margin. We are recommending at this point that we keep the discount at 1%. Again, we won't know the final rates until the last CPUC decision in December. So until then, we're saying, let's take this as a forecast, and we can always revisit the discount rate once we have more certainty around these two big parameters that impact our budget. So that's basically sets the context for the revenue numbers you're going to see on the next slide. Next slide, please, Andrea. So here's how our budget is looking. You can see the revenue number has increased significantly. At the mid-year budget time, we were forecasting for the current fiscal year revenues of about $252 million. Now we're projecting for the next fiscal year to be about $339 million. So that's a substantial increase, again, due to that higher blue box that I showed you in the previous slide. Power supply expenses, again, this is the big, when we talk about expenses, this is the big expense in our portfolio. It's over 90% of our costs. Power supply costs are significantly higher because, and we'll talk about that in the next few slides, and it's primarily due to high prices. And as you can see, the operating expenses are coming in higher. We're projecting them to be higher, and a big part of that is due to the staffing increase, and I'll talk about that in future slide as well. So if these numbers prevail, we're looking at adding to our reserves by end of the year, end of the fiscal year, by about $36.5 million. Next slide, please. So power supply cost, again, as of now, 82% of our portfolio is hedged. So the remaining 18% is still subject to market prices, and prices have moved up significantly. And there are some charts in the appendix of your presentation where you can see the volatility of the prices. And also, so as you know, the supply-demand conditions are tight. That's not just raising power prices high; it's raising the cost of securing RA resources. So all these elements in the dry hydro year is leading to high power supply costs. Yeah, so I think we'll go to the next slide. On the operating expenses, so operating expenses I mentioned are coming in about $5 million higher. As you can see, the big item here is item number 2, staffing. We're adding 6 new positions. We're increasing headcount from authorized headcount of 32 positions to about 38 positions. We're asking for 6 additional headcounts, and I'll go into a little bit of detail in the next slide. And some of our costs, about $550,000, is coming from the fact that now all these PPAs that we signed are coming online, and we have to basically, there are costs, operational costs, to basically integrate them to get the support we need from modeling perspective, scheduling coordination services, coordinating with our partner 3CE, and that's, we're projecting that to be about $550,000. And the third item here is the business process optimization. This ties into our strategic focus area of building enterprise-wide system. As we're maturing as an organization, we want to basically minimize operational risk. One of the ways we do that is building robust systems that's in line with industry standards of tools and resources we need on a power trading portfolio. The first phase of this is about $1 million. The second phase is also going to cost about $1 million as well, but that'll be in the following fiscal year. Cybersecurity enhancements. We are undergoing our IT audit. We've also hired another firm to basically independently assess our infrastructure. And they will, through this review process, they will identify gaps. And we're going to review what's in scope at the audit committee meeting coming up on the 18th. And that's going to add about $150,000 to our expenses. And the last item here is contingency. You know, we need a healthy margin of contingency for operating expenses, and we budgeted about $1 million for that. With that, I'll go to the next slide and talk about new positions. So 6 new positions. One is in the account services area. So to lead the new all the things we want to do on our programming side to basically fight climate change. We need resources to implement the program, so we're asking for at least 1 additional headcount in this area. We're asking for another headcount in our power resources team to oversee the PPAs that are coming online. We're asking for a compliance manager in our L&R group to basically centralize and ensure our compliance with the numerous amount of regulatory compliance obligations that we have as an organization. And in the finance and administration area, we're seeking 3 new resources. One is a dedicated resource on HR. We currently don't have one. To administer benefits, support our hybrid work, transition to a hybrid work environment. Also, as we're Recruiting is a challenge for us, and this resource will help with that effort. And recruiting could also take place. We may have people out of state as we have currently. So we need to look into benefits that we can apply outside of California. So there's a lot of work on HR front that we need to handle. We're also asking for a senior risk manager to basically independently monitor the portfolio risk of our portfolio. And this person will also play a critical role in the business process optimization. And one of the main areas of focus will be on counterparty credit risk analysis. Make sure the transactions we do with counterparties are with creditworthy counterparties, and then there are provisions within those contracts on how we manage counterparty credit risk that has a lot of quantitative requirements that we need to model and monitor. And the last here is the technology services manager position. Again, as we're maturing and we're building data warehouses, bringing in some third-party tools, we need to integrate, maintain these. We need a dedicated resource because the workload in the IT area is going to increase significantly as we develop and implement enterprise-wide systems. Next slide, please. So now so this is something we've talked to the board before. To better manage the organization, we're asking that the board grant, similar to other CCAs, the CEO as a chief personnel officer. So currently, any changes to the organization we bring to the board. Now we're asking the CEO have the flexibility to basically approve job titles, salary changes, changes to the org chart, swapping positions, adding positions, but positions that to be added will be all within the board approved budget. So not to exceed the budget without specific board authorization. And any additions would also not to exceed 10% of the authorized number in the budget. And any changes we make to the organization will be reported in the next CEO. Next slide, please. So let's look at our reserves. So we're going to start the year with healthy reserves, and we're looking next year to add about 36.5 million to the reserves. So currently we have a line of credit with the bank, and that's about $35 million. We don't really use that line of credit, and we're saying let's not renew the line of credit. It's going to it's up for renewal in October, and we've indicated to the bank that our intention is not to renew. That will save us about $150,000, I wish, dollars a year. Again, because of where we are as a healthy organization financially, we don't need that excess expense of having a line of credit, and this should not have any material impact on our credit ratings because of our healthy reserves. What we're asking the board, and again, both the finance committee and the executive committee unanimously supported this recommendation, is that we change our reserve target. So we sort of the line of credit provided additional cash liquidity of about 30 to 50 days of cash on hand. We're saying, well, let's add that and kind of self-fund that level of liquidity by raising our reserve target. So we're saying, let's raise the minimum reserve target by 30 days from 90 to 120 days, and the target from 180 to 230 days, and the maximum to 270 to 320 days. And again, healthy reserves are good for the organization. It's we had a lot of questions when WCE went bankrupt, and the first response we gave was to the rating agency was look at our reserves. Something happened, we lost our slides. Okay, there we go. Next slide, please. So was there another slide on the reserves policy and budget change? Yeah. So what we're asking, and this is something we've we discussed with the Finance Committee. Finance Committee supported this, and also discussed the concept with the Executive Committee, is that we revise our reserve and budget policy. The way the reserve policy is currently written, it says that any use of reserves requires Board of Directors authorization. And given the nature of our business, it's not practical because we're dealing with a very volatile commodity. And you need certain level of work, sort of like a working capital, certain level of threshold where you can dip in and out of reserves. So because our fiscal year ends at the end of the summer, which also makes this very complicated, we cannot forecast that we're going to exceed power supply expenses, right? So what we're asking is, because of the volatility in power supply expenses, that the board grant that the organization can use up to 10% of the budgeted cost of power supply to use reserves. And these are not discretionary expenditures. These are power supply expense variability. For example, let's say similar to last year, a heat wave comes in August and September. Our load will go up. When load goes up, our cost of power supply will go up. So we can easily exceed our authorized budget. And what happens within the time when load goes up during these heat waves, prices also goes up. So it's a double whammy. So and we don't really have discretion at that point. We don't have discretion at that point, because what California ISO will do, will say, here's the energy you used, here's the energy you supplied into the grid, the difference, here's the bill. And from a governance perspective, it doesn't look good when we've asked the board that we're only going to, for let's say upcoming fiscal year, we're only going to spend 273 million, and we end up spending more than that. So we want some level of flexibility there. And the other areas that can add to this need is the revenue variations. The major component is the power supply volatility, but also if revenues don't materialize for whatever reason, let's say we lost a customer, we could be dipping our reserves. We could also be using reserves to post collateral under the master agreements that the board is authorized, under which we execute our energy supply contracts. Those have credit provisions where we could be posting collateral, which would actually reduce our reserves. It's not a realized expense, it's a credit risk management. So for these reasons, we're asking this level of cushion that we can operate within. And if we foresee that we're going to exceed 10%, we will have ample time, because we will monitor this. We will come to the board and ask for approval. But we think 10% of our power supply budget would be sufficient amount that we can stay compliant with our policies, board approved policies. Next slide, Andrea, please. So that brings me to the summary slide. So again, next year looks to be a very good year. Our margins are favorable. Again, we can't bank on these until these are forecast numbers, until at least the PCIA and PG&E gen rates are known. We propose to keep our discount at 1% of PG&E rates. We can revisit this later once the PG&E and PCIA rates are known with certainty. And again, for reasons I explained, we need flexibility within the reserve and budget policy to use reserves. And we were asking that we increase our reserve targets and eliminate the line of credit by raising the targets for the target by level by 50 days, and the maximum by 50 days, and the minimum actually by 30 days. And I think that was the last slide, and there are a lot more details in the appendix. I see there are already some questions.
Thank you, Amrit. We will go to questions from directors. Director Armendariz.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your hard work on this. Mr. Singh. I wanted to just ask a quick question about slide 9 and some language. For items over 10%, it says that the staff will be directed to seek board approval versus language now that says it must get approved. So is that, are you intending for the language to, or for staff to that they must get approval, or again, they'll only seek approval?
So we're saying, give us the flexibility, operational flexibility we need to manage the business, so we can use the reserves up to 10% of the budgeted power supply cost. If we feel, let's say, we're monitoring this on a month-to-month basis, we feel, are we going to exceed the 10%? We will have time to come to the board and ask for approval, specific approval that says we need more than 10%. We need, X million dollars. Let's revise our budget. But the 10% is there, for example, in the months of July, August, September, when we may not have time to do our analytics and run the numbers, and the prices goes up. There's not much we can do, and we want to be compliant with the policies. We will end up actually spending more than our budget.
Right. No, I get that, but I'm just asking about the point 2 on the second bullet point here. So if it's in excess of 10%, staff will still be required to get board approval, right?
Correct.
But there'll be more
yeah. And this will be good
flexibility for items that are less than 10%.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this will be
The
good.
language seems a bit ambiguous because it says to seek board approval versus still must receive board approval.
It will. In the policy, it's more clear, actually.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Fligor?
You, Chair, and I'll pick up on where Director Armendez left off on that 10% amount, Amrit. I'm wondering, and thanks for this presentation. I know we got a preview at the executive committee, and this is even a more in-depth analysis, and I think it's very helpful for the full board to see this. On the 10%, Amrit, I'm wondering if we could also add as part of the policy, and if not, I would love to hear why, because I understand that we would not have an option here if the cost goes up. We just have to figure out, how we're going to cover that cost. But I'm wondering if, in addition to staff coming back to the board, if it will exceed that 10%, if we could also add that staff would come back to the board if the amount will cause our reserves to drop below the minimum reserve amount that you had on the earlier slide. And my concern there is, I know we have the minimum, the target, and the maximum, and I think it's very important for the board to know whenever we're going to dip below that minimum reserve amount. And so I'm curious whether or not that's something we could also incorporate into the policy.
Yeah, I will look into the policy. I believe the policy already says we will have to take action if we foresee we're gonna reach the minimum.
Okay, so so you'll come back to us if that amount will also.
It may already be in the policy. I think there's language there that if we foresee that we're gonna reach a minimum, we have to come to the board with recommendations as to what actions we need to take. We may have to raise our rates, for example. May have to cut programs. So I think that's in there, but I'll double check.
Great, thanks, Amrit. And then my second question has to do with having our CEO act as the Chief Personnel Officer. And I understand the reason why, and I support the concept. But with regards to what he would be able to do as our Chief Personnel Officer on the salary ranges, would the board still approve the salary ranges, but we would delegate the authority to the CEO, Chief Personnel Officer, to determine what amounts within those ranges would be paid? I'm trying to understand, when you say salary ranges, would the CEO set the salary ranges, or would that still be approved at our level But then we would obviously give the chief personnel officer that delegation of authority to determine the actual salary for the employee.
I think our intention is the CEO have the discretion to set the salaries and respond to market conditions.
The range. To set the salary range.
Right.
Okay. And then, and this is just questions. I know we'll have discussion after public comment. On the new position, so as the board knows, we also unfortunately lost a couple employees over the last several months. And so for the new positions that you're showing, that does not include the employees or the positions that we still need to fill.
Correct. We still have a lot of vacancies to fill, and these will add to that actually. So we have a lot of recruiting efforts.
But the only budget increase that you're requesting solely relates to these new positions, not the vacancies that we still have to fill.
Yeah, so we've budgeted for 38 headcount. So that includes the current vacancies as well as these 6 new positions. And we've also budgeted, we said we expect about 5% vacancy rate. So we've kind of baked that in the budget as well.
Okay. And then my last question just has to do with the infrastructure bill that was just passed out of the US Senate. And I know it needs to go to the House and that they're going to do the whole reconciliation process. But I know just from reading the news articles and hearing the news stories that I think millions, if not billions, in the current version will be allocated to clean energy efforts. And I'm wondering, looking at our budget and the forecast is positive, which is great. But do we know whether, any of that we could actually tap into or benefit from, or is it too early to say?
Maybe I'll answer that. It's mostly too early to say. We have Benna Chang is following that on our behalf. And we are also working through CalCCA to see if it makes sense for us to collaborate with multiple CCAs to get a federal lobbyist to make sure to increase our chances of monies flowing our way. We did have the opportunity to meet with Representative Rokana, and I want to thank our board member Evelyn Chua for facilitating that meeting. And one of the things we did ask for was to have CCA's name in any bill that gets put forth. So that's in play. And we also asked for the investment tax credit for standalone energy storage to be extended. There's a lot more money since those last conversations have happened. So we will follow up on this and bring it to your attention.
Thank you, Girish.
Thank you. We'll go to Director Chua.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm what I saw on the agenda with Mr. Singh. And these are the issues that I saw, and please confirm if they're correct. I'm like pleasantly happy and surprised that the proposed budget shows an increase in revenue 87.3 million compared to last year, 2021, due to the reduced PCIA forecast and the increase in PG&E generation rate. Is that true?
That's true. Again, it's based on the forecast, but that's what the consensus belief is right now on those rates, and we will know for sure by end of the year what those rates are.
That's really awesome. And also I noted that the operating expenses anticipated to increase by 5.2 million. About half of this increase is the result of increasing staffing, annualization position created in 2021, and the 6 proposed positions, and increase in professional services needs. Proposed budget also includes 5% cost of living adjustment to salaries. That's correct.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you. I love those data.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions from directors? Yes, Director Lahi.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot to go through in this budget. I'm always concerned where we have a great CEO in Girish, but I'm always looking at having an evil twin taking his place. Hopefully never happen, but something the board has to do to fulfill their fiduciary duties. So there's a couple of things that are requested here that I think we should take a look at. And my question was, and I think there was some confusion between slide 9 and slide 11. Slide 9, I believe, had to do with the staffing, if you want to put that up again, and that would allow the CEO as a personnel to add 10% to the staffing position. So that's my thought was that slide 9 really has to do with the number of staff people that are out there, and that it could be increased by 10%, and perhaps it also means that the payroll for the staff could be increased by 10%. So I thought staff 9 just had to do with the staffing itself and nothing to do with the power purchase agreement, which was in slide 11. Am I correct on that?
Correct. So in this slide, we're saying the CEO can increase headcounts by 10% of the authorized headcount. So 10% from 38 positions, but it still has to be within the board approved budget.
Understood. So, but this is just
And the other 10% we're talking about powers is totally different. This is just positions.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought there was a little confusing because we started discussion on number 9 and then
right.
number 11. So so this is just the individuals. So from 38, if you increase it by 10%, you'll have 41.3 people, I guess, or something like that.
Yes.
Okay, but it doesn't have to do with the actual payroll. I mean, your payroll, if it's at 2.5 million, or I don't remember what the number is, that could go up to 10% also, or
no, it has to be within the board approved budget. So if we see that the budget is going to increase as a result of these headcounting changes, we would have to come to the board.
All right. So that makes sense. Now going back to number 11, that has to do, and you made a good presentation on why you need the flexibility. I'd like to cap that. I mean, if our purchase, and my question is, if you're purchasing, the cost of power purchases, a number of $1.5 billion was thrown out there for just a bond that's being done. So I'm not sure what the maximum power purchase is going to be for SVC with the next, and this would be ad infinitum because this resolution would apply prospectively. So let's say if you have a $1.5 billion purchase and 10% increase would be 150 million. I'd like to put a cap on it. I would suggest a cap on it to give you the flexibility for 10% because you can go get back to the board fairly quickly. You can do a meeting with the executive director fairly quickly. You can do a meeting with the board on shortened notice, I guess within 48 hours. So probably maybe a $20 million or a $30 million cap, so that you can do your 10% but cap it. And I think that suggestion was made to cap it to the reserve, but that the reserve is 150 million or something, and this may be getting a little bit further up than something that that the board should have the opportunity to look at it and say, okay, yeah, everything is fine, and this is really actual cost, and it's not something else that's just being snuck in there.
Yeah, let me just clarify one thing. I want to make sure that when we say 10% of budgeted power purchases, this would be 10% for next fiscal year. The budget for power supply is 173.5 million or so. So it's not the 1.5 billion, it's 10% of that. But I think we can cap it at 30 million. I think that will give us sufficient headroom to come back to the board.
Yeah, that some number. I mean, I'm just throwing that number. I think board can consider.
We were thinking, I mean, 10% is around 30 million.
Okay.
About 27 million, so it's close, 30 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Vice Chair, you had your hand up. You're okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to open up for public comment. Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand or press *9 on the phone, and we'll start with Bruce Carney. Please unmute yourself to speak.
Thank you. So, directors, we're almost 2 hours into this meeting. You've just had Directors, we're almost 2 hours into this meeting. You've just had a highly technical and lengthy presentation about finances. I've probably attended 100 city council meetings and SVCE board meetings. So I know that it becomes difficult at this stage in the proceedings to ask hard questions about staff recommendations, but I'm going to ask you to do this tonight, particularly with respect to the request from staff to increase the reserve target by 50 days of reserves. This goes back to the comment I made at the very top of the meeting about urgency. So in a time of uncertainty about finances, and SVCE will always be uncertain about finances because PG&E is the piper who plays the tune and SVCE responds to the tune that PG&E plays. It's always tempting to say, let's be more cautious, let's increase our reserves, let's be more conservative. But the climate crisis suggests that that's the wrong approach. I would suggest that SVCE needs to really focus on its programs, on developing and deploying programs rapidly that are likely to be highly leveraged, that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the service territory. I know this is a difficult thing to ask you to do tonight. At the same time that I'm asking this, I'm also saying that I think you should trust your CEO to make the right decisions. I would like the CEO to have much of the operational flexibility that is being requested here. But in terms of strategic direction, I would like you to make a strong statement that the strategic direction of SVCE should not be to become financially more conservative. It should be to become operationally more urgent, to develop programs to incentivize residents of our cities to buy EVs, to replace their water heaters with heat pump water heaters, to replace their natural gas stoves with induction cooktops, to do all of these things, to fill the vacant staff positions, to fill the newly authorized staff positions. Please don't get conservative. Be bold. Climate action can't wait. Get out in front of the issue. Be bold. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? I don't see any more hands, so I'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for any further discussion or direction. Yes, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two comments, if you would indulge me. One is that when we were talking about slide 11 and contingency, what I is an example for that. If anybody's done a home remodel, kitchen, whatever, and you think it's going to cost $20,000, you always put in your budget $25,000 because you know something's going to happen that you can't predict. That's your contingency. So I was very supportive of this 10% flexibility and use of the budget because it's like the price of gasoline. If a refinery goes down, gas goes up 25 cents a gallon. These are things in our industry and what we're dealing with here we can't predict. So I really was very pleased to see this recognition, what it's going to take to continue working in our business with very high volatility. So that was the one thing. And the other is much to what Bruce's point was, and I'm going to offer this as a perspective from my own city council, but I'm going to guess that it might be relevant, which is that as much as are important, no ifs, ands, or buts, we really need to move forward aggressively on policies. We need to get city councils on board to make the tough decisions that city councils need to make and to let city councils make policy that leads their cities. And I really think, people's climate action plans, some cities have really good climate action plans, some don't. There was a comment earlier, and I'm not going to find my correct note, about what I think was Bruce's earlier comment. What's the status of our reductions? What progress are we really making? So I am okay right now with doing the budget the way staff has planned, because I've been around enough cycles to know the PCIA and the price of PG&E is never totally certain. And when December comes around, we will have a solid assessment of what that is. And then the board can take advantage of that situation and move aggressively. And I'm hoping that some of the aggressive actions will be to work with our cities on policies and implementation that set the example for our communities.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll go to Director Yulo.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Mr. Carney for his comments, and also echo what the Vice Chair just said, that it's perhaps a little bit uncertain right now as to what the actual expected contribution to reserves will be next year. But as much as it pains me to say it, I would just suggest to Mr. Carney that he be patient for a couple more months, and I think his patience will be rewarded. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's go to Director Tyson. Could you unmute yourself, Director Tyson?
I can't believe I'm that guy. All right. Well, I appreciate the previous comments and also what Bruce said about kind of keeping our eye on the goal. But we have to keep our eye on the goal while we kind of mind our business. And as he said, we had quite a few complicated issues presented to us. But let's face it, they aren't all brand new to us. We've had a chance to think about them and sort through them over the last couple of months. And so given that, I would say, what's our context? Our context is we're looking at what looks like quite a favorable year coming up. But we're in the context of a $17 million, negative or deficit this year. And we're in the context of another CCA going under just a few months ago. And so I absolutely endorse the goals that Bruce mentioned, but let's do it ourselves from a position of strength. I'm eager to implement, and I like the things that I saw here today as a proposal, and let's implement those. And it's not conservative for us to approach it this way, but just to make sure we're financially strong. And let's face it, one of the things we really need is to have a fully capable staff that can operationalize things that we're doing. And one of the things that's going to help us do that is to be innovative and forward focused and carbon free. And we're going to be the employer of choice. That's what I'm hoping for as we move forward. And that's going to make it even easier to accomplish the kinds of goals we all share.
Thank you. We'll go to Director Larson.
Yeah, thank you. I want to follow on to all those good comments from my fellow directors. And I'm very interested in SVCE being effective on the policy front over the long term, that we're really playing, we intend to be here for a long time and make a difference over a long time. And to be aggressive, we really need a solid foundation. And right now we're going through a period of maturation as an organization in a number of different ways. And not just through growing the staff, but also through some of our internal processes, so that we can make a real difference for many, many years. We've faced some threats over the last few years that have felt almost existential. Whether it's been legislation at the state level, CPUC decisions, having to dip into reserves this year. And now we have a very good prospect for next year, but there's so much that is out of our control. And sometimes I think of our budgeting process almost like how a water agency thinks about water planning. They don't know what the next year is going to be. Is it going to be a wet year? Will it be a dry year? Are we going into a multi-year drought? And the agency really has to prepare for all of those outcomes. And I think that it's important that, that as we think about the budget, that we think about being sustainable over multiple years. And I was glad to see the language in the proposed policy about a multi-year financial model. Maybe projection is a little bit too strong because it's hard to predict what's exactly going to happen, but having a multi-year model as a framework for thinking about how are our decisions or the new regulations from CPUC, for example, or technology changes affect our viability over multiple years. It is difficult to come up with good models when our biggest expense is power, which is a very volatile expense. And yet I think developing a framework so that we can evaluate these changes will be helpful. And also, I think actually help us be more aggressive with our programs and policies. If we can have more certainty that we will be in good shape over multiple years. If we can only look 1 year in advance, it's very hard to make long-term commitments and to be more aggressive. And so I think that moving in that direction is an important part of us maturing as an organization so we can make really good, solid decisions and be very, very effective for a long time to come into the future. So just wanted to share those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Director Lahi.
Thank you. Yeah, really good comments by Director Tyson and Vice Chair Gibbons and Larson. And I really appreciate what Bruce Carney had to say. I mean, sometimes we forget budget isn't really about numbers. It's about achieving goals as to, what are we trying to accomplish? It's not just a question of balancing financial statements. It's really about, hey, this is what we're here for. And Silicon Valley Clean Energy, the purpose is to provide clean energy and to work as aggressively as possible to provide it. So some of the stuff we probably need to do may have nothing to do with numbers. It may have to do with our own personal motivation or gusto, or how we get out there and get our cities to get on the track, and how we maybe organize events or do some other things to help out. And that would help us. I mean, it would probably not have much to do with numbers. So I appreciate Bruce's keeping us on track on that one. Let's see what our staff can come up with on how we can just do things that will inspire everybody to go to the clean energy thing. I think the codes that we did, the reach codes were helpful, and something else like that would be inspiring. The other thing I liked about the proposal that on the budget was a 1% discount rate, keeping it up there. So that may seem like it's higher than we may need to be, but really we are in the business of helping people that may need help. So if we are able to generate a higher reserve or a higher budget, that will be available to do what we need to do in this area to provide, get people motivated towards clean energy, and also to balance between, I mean, the houses that have solar energy are usually the richer people who don't need subsidy, and they seem to be, and I think this was the whole discussion on the rates as to how much you pay them when they generate more energy, and we have to pay them back at solar or retail. I think we just passed that on the consent calendar. But maybe that needs to be looked at to say, okay, we don't give 2% to everybody. We give 1% to people above the first $500 and give 2% to people, in the lower brackets. So those are the kind of things that may be helpful. So let's work on that, and hopefully we can come up with some programs that really we should be, maybe I'll ask staff to take a look at it, see what they can do and they really have to push the city council people. They got to push us and say, go back to your city and do this. This needs to get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other director comments? I just want to thank you all for your really enlightening comments. I agree with everyone. Yes, everything that was said. I would say, number one, I'm excited and happy that we're in a positive budget situation. but seeing going from minus 6 million to plus 36 million really reflects the volatility, the swings that we experience in our industry. And so I think that really reaffirms our need to be in a strong financial foundation. And I appreciate staff's hard work on the budget, the new recommendations. I definitely feel that as we grow, and we also have, as mentioned, a great CEO, allowing for more flexibility to be able to more quickly respond to the changes and the adjustments that are needed to be able to continue to move forward in a financially strong manner. So I support the recommendations that are being asked of us this evening. I understand, Bruce is always great. Bruce Carney is always great at keeping us and reminding us what a big part of our mission is. And I am also a big, supporter of programs, and, have been really kind of anxious at times to see more programs happen. Relative to that, as Director Lahi mentioned, the 1% discount, rate. I do appreciate that we're holding on to that. I know in the past we have been somewhat more mindful perhaps of the pricing and trying to offer as much of a discount as possible, but for me, I actually would prefer to keep a constant discount rate, and then whatever savings we accrue to be able to apply that into more programs, and because that way we can really target and direct the funds into areas that we think are going to be the highest rate of return, as if you want to say it in that manner. But that's been my thoughts around the discount rate and pricing versus programs. I know I've had conversations with the CEO about programs. I think we'll be talking more about that down the road. I appreciate Vice Chair's comments about policy, because I think that's really what we all can do collectively. The REACH codes were a success. I think we're going to be looking at REACH codes 2.0, and other similar policies that can really move the needle too. So, and what I'd like to do, or I know the CEO has this in mind, is tying policy to programs, and again, really being able to focus in on where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. So with that, I don't know, CEO, if you have any further comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, actually, I just want to thank the entire board for all the comments that they made. And maybe to just summarize a little bit about what our takeaways are from Board Member Armendariz. We will clarify the SEEK approval. We'll make sure that when we come back to you in September that is clear. From Board Members Fligor and Lahi, we will clarify the reserve levels, the 10% authority. So we will not utilize that authority if it gets us below our already approved low minimum reserve level. We'll also put a cap on that authority as per Javad's recommendation. Then I think the more strategic kind of feedback we've got is, let's be bold and work from a position of strength. And what we will do as staff is get prepared to act, so that when the money is so-called, the confidence level that we will have a financial strength even better secured, we're not going to be start to think about programs at that time. We will be prepared. We will reach out to Bruce and other community advocates. We'll also reach out to MOG members to get some ideas. It's almost like accelerating that carbon reduction. How can we do it? And I really believe that the policy lever is a giant lever for us. So there's a lot to do on the policy side and the program side to achieve our goals. And this is exactly the kind of feedback we were looking for, very specific feedback on the budget, so we can get you your a budget document for approval. But also, like Board Member Lahi said, the whole purpose of a budget is to achieve something, and we got direction on that too. So thank you very much for all that feedback.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, do you have what you need?
I do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, directors, for the lively discussion. That was super helpful. With that, we go on now to board member announcements and direction on future agenda items. Does anyone, any directors have any announcements or comments? Yes, Vice Chair.
Got to find my notes. I believe that Don Bray is giving a presentation in a couple weeks for a business journal panel. And also there is a CPUC panel on August 26th on utility discounts and affordability. And I've set that on to Andrea, asking her to forward that to the board.
Thank you. Any other directors? If not, we will go on to the next item. So we will be moving into closed session, and I'll make the closed session announcement. Their closed session will be to discuss public employee performance evaluation of the Chief Executive Officer and a conference with labor negotiator, agency representatives, Margaret Abekoga, Chair, and Liz Givens, Vice Chair of the Board of Directors, and unrepresented employee Chief Executive Officer. And at this time, I'd like to see if there are any public comments on our closed session items. You are in the attendee box. Again, please raise your hand or *9 on the phone. And I don't see any, so I will close public comment, and we will, it's hard to estimate, but I'm going to try to say, let's try maybe 45 minutes. We should be returning around a little, hopefully by 10 or somewhere around there. But I believe I also don't anticipate anything to report out. So that's for the public who is watching us. And then with that, I think we will be asking the public and all staff members to please exit the meeting, and then we will lock this meeting for our closed sessions. So if you could bear with us, if directors want to take a 5-minute break while we do this, please do so. And I'll work with Andrea on making sure I have everything I need to lock us into closed session. Thank you. So we are reconvening into open session, and there is no closed session report. So we will adjourn this meeting at 10:31 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone. Please take care, be well, and we will see you next month.